focus on multis, liberal arts, and vocational studies. In the light of impact of national education policy on higher education system, the speaker of session 2, Professor Yashwant Dongre, chairperson of subcommittee, Task Force for Implementation of NEP in Karnataka, will concentrate on regulations and governance issues of higher education. Both the sessions will immediately be followed by Q&A. Selected questions will be clarified. On the whole, the webinar is a small effort to create awareness about National Education Policy 2020 among the stakeholders of Indian education system. Good day, one and all. Hope all of you will take home a better understanding of NEP 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Now I call upon Srimati Rekha, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to introduce Dr. Shakila Shamshu, the guest speaker of session 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. It gives me an immense pleasure to introduce about today's speaker of the session 1, Dr. Shakila Shamshu. Dr. Shakila Shamshu was formerly OSD, New Education Policy, in the Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education. She has been the secretary to the committee to draft National Education Policy. She was also the nodal officer of the flagship Government of India scheme of National Mission on Teachers and Teaching, NMIT, and during her tenure, 95 centers were approved for successfully undertaking professional capacity building of faculty. Over 5 lakh faculties have been trained since 2015. In addition, new initiatives of Leadership for Academicians program, LEAP, annual refresher programs in teaching, ARPIT, and faculty induction program were implemented. Prior to this, she had positions such as OSD in 12th Plan, in MOE and Joint Advisor Planning Commission. Areas cover education planning and policy making, teacher education, ICT, as well as open and distance learning and inclusive education. Her academic career spans over 39 years, 9 years in the University of Mumbai, 16 years in IGNOU, and over 14 years in the Government of India. She holds her PhD in Education, Gold Medalist for Masters of Political Science, PG Diploma in Distance Education, and a degree in Law. She has to her credit a number of articles in international journal and book contributions and preparations of 9th Plan as well as 12th Plan and several government reports on education. She has been privileged to be a member of several committees of the Government of India, State Government, UGC, National Selection Committees for Brightful Fellowship, etc. She has been privileged to address several national and international conferences with the country and UK, Australia, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, and Nepal. On behalf of First Grade College and Department of Commerce, I welcome you, ma'am, for the session.
Thank you for the...
Now I welcome you, ma'am.
Yeah. Can I start the session or you have something else before that? Thank you for the brief introduction. In fact, not a brief one. You elaborately read out the entire introduction that I shared with you. And I'm thankful to Mahajanas College. I was happy to see a brief introduction of the university and familiarize myself with such an esteemed institution, of which, to be very frank, I was not very aware of till I agreed to join you for this webinar. And I am thankful to the management of Mahajanas College, the principal of the First Grade Degree College, Dr. Rashmi, who's been the person behind trying to convince me of joining this webinar, and all others who are present here, and my fellow panelist, Professor Dongre, who I am happy to know is a member of the task force for implementing it. Professor M.K. Sridhar, who has been a member of the committee, I think, chairs the session and so chairs the task force, and also I think Mr. Anurag Beher, Vice Chancellor of APU, are all members of the task force in Karnataka, which is noticeably the first state to actually initiate the process for implementing NEP 2020. Extremely grateful for this opportunity, and I try to keep myself limited to something about 40 minutes or so that we can have some time for the interaction. Now, the NEP 2020, as you are all aware, and I'm sure many of you have gone through it in detail, is considered the first policy of the 21st century. As far as the country is concerned, this is the third education policy, the first being in 1968. That was the outcome of the Kothari Commission report, which was for the period between 64 to 66. Then we had in 1986 the second education policy, which was slightly modified with a program of action in 1992, but treated together as 86/92. And the third policy being the NEP 2020, which is the outcome of a laborious effort by the government, covering a period as wide as 5.5 years, that is starting from January 2015, going on to July 2020. That has been the journey of NEP 2020. I consider myself fortunate to have been there in this policy formulation right from its inception, which has seen 3 union ministers of education, starting with Madam Smriti Irani, with Prakash Javadekar ji, and thereafter the incumbent minister Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank ji. So the policy itself has had a long journey of 5.5 years. And as every faculty who's trying to understand this policy must also try to understand how this policy was different from earlier policies. While it is a fact that the NEP 2020 is largely the outcome of the report of the committee to draft NEP 2019, which was headed by Dr. K. Kasturirangan, the eminent scientist and ISRO chief, Padma Vibhushan holder. It is not just this committee's report, it is not just this committee's consultations that form the basis of NEP 2020. I just in a snapshot try to, in a 3-minute period, try to tell you what went into the making of this policy, and you will all appreciate that this would be one of the most humongous exercises of consultations and stakeholder views that were invited, which would have gone into almost about 6 to 7 lakh suggestions coming from all quarters of this country. We had it online on 26 January 2015, and it was put up on a platform of the Government of India called MyGov. Starting from 26th of January, it went on up to 31st of October. And for this discussion, we had identified in the ministry 33 themes, 20 themes in higher education and 13 themes in school education. And since we are confining ourselves to higher education, the themes ranged from strengthening of state universities to promoting research and innovation, ensuring or bridging the regional and other gaps, social gaps in education, internationalization, regulatory system, governance systems, how to enhance the investment into education, how could there be better internationalization, and improving the quality of undergraduate education. There were 20 themes of this kind on which, on the platform of MyGov, we invited suggestions. And in school education also, there were 13 themes which ranged from focus on the learning outcomes to learning of maths and science, improving the quality of teacher education, focus on child health, all these aspects, assessment and so on. And we received something to the tune of about 38 suggestions or so on the MyGov platform, which was common to, it was open to everybody. The other stream that we simultaneously started from May 2015 is what we call as the grassroots consultation, where starting from the 6 lakhs villages in this country, going on to the block level, which is around 6,600, covering urban local bodies, which range to around 3,700 or so, coming to about 620 odd districts that were there, the states and the UTs taken together, 36 to 37. Across these layers, across these levels, we had consultations taking place. And there, for this exercise, we had devised a question template for each of the 33 themes for people to start having meetings and arrive at certain resolutions, which then flew on to the higher levels. So the village education committee, along with the Gram Sabhas, at the local village level, conducted meetings of the Gram Panchayat Samitis and then arrived at resolutions, which was again plotted onto a sister site of MyGov called survey.mygov.in. And this is where I said that at no level of any policy making exercise in this world, leave it all our own country, we would have done such a massive consultation where every person within this country had an opportunity to participate and give his or her views on what should be the future of our education landscape. And this exercise we had received across this, amazingly, we had 1.25 lakh villages which responded, some 3,000 odd blocks, similar number for the urban local bodies. And coming to the districts, we had for higher education something like 400 districts responding. And for school education themes, we had something like about 350 districts responding. And all states and UTs what did the exercise of collating all these resolutions and then giving us an outcome document, which then flowed into a committee, which was known as the Committee for Evolution of New Education Policy, headed by the former secretary, TSR Subramaniam, late former secretary, he is no more. And this committee's report was submitted to the ministry on 26th May 2016. The third strain, I'll come back to that committee and the outcome of that. The third strain of consultation was thematic consultations. On these 33 themes, we had autonomous bodies and the regulators, the UGC, the AICT, NCT, NCRT, NEPA, CBSE, Association for Indian Universities, NAC, all of them conducted expert level consultations where leading educationists, people from industry, civil society, private sector, and they all have contributed and given us outcome documents of discussions, which was also done by the ministry level, where each bureau head looking after the different themes had expert level consultations, which then went into actually this was given to the TSR Subramaniam committee, and they have gone through that and then submitted their report in 2016. So it was online, it was thematic expert level discussions and grassroots level consultations from the village to the state level, going on up to the national level, where we had 6 zonal meetings headed by the then minister, Madam Smriti Irani ji. And it was on the last day of the Northern Zonal consultation on 31st October that the TSR Subramaniam committee was constituted, which gave its report in 2016. The government somehow did not feel very comfortable about accepting the recommendations of that report. It is still there in public domain on the website of NEPA, which was a secretariat to that committee. Thereafter, the ministry did an internal exercise, which is called Some Inputs to the Draft National Education Policy, which was purely an exercise that 3 of us in the ministry have done. One joint secretary, myself, and one external expert had prepared it, which is also there on the ministry website. Both these documents were laid on the floor of the parliament in the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha in August 2017, by which time the minister had changed and we had Honorable Prakash Javadekar ji, who was the Union Minister for Education, and he had to give an assurance on a reply to a short duration discussion that when we did not accept the TSR Subramaniam committee report, and there was a lot of reaction to that in the parliament, that he would constitute another committee, and that would be headed by an educationist. And that is how this committee, headed by the Honorable K. Kasturranganji, was constituted, which had again academicians and people from different streams and representing management, agriculture, management, the Persian and Persian language expert, tribal studies, Katimani ji. There was a host of these set of people, 9 people, to which I was the secretary to the committee from the ministry side. And we had then undertaken a consultation process on the basis of which we submitted our report to the new minister, Nishank ji, on 31st May 2019. And this report also received 2 lakh suggestions. Based on the feedback and based on the report, we have the new NEP 2020, which was approved by the cabinet on 29th July 2020. This has been the longest journey in policy making, one of the more massive and most comprehensive ones, which has tried all methods, including the digital platforms, for inviting suggestions. And in that sense, it is a path-breaking effort to bring about a policy where all stakeholder views were taken on board. Coming to the philosophical foundations, I'm happy that Dr. Rashmi mentioned about the SDG 4 goal, and that has been one of the strongest foundations on the basis of which many of the recommendations of this policy are based, which is to provide inclusive and equitable quality education with lifelong learning opportunities. And this particular goal is accepted by the United Nations as being the driver goal by which the remaining 16 SDG goals could become a reality. But more importantly, the other philosophical basis on which this NEP 2020 is based on Jacques Delors' Commission report, which is called Learning in the 21st Century, Learning the Treasure Within, and which identified that learning is not a single activity, neither is it by itself an end in itself. Learning is a means to something else. And these 4 pillars are learning to know, learning to do, learning to live with others and to live together, and learning to be. Each of these, one, learning to know, the knowledge base and the knowledge acquisition. Learning to do, the application of the knowledge and working with your hands. The learning to do is the skill-based and the application of that knowledge, the experiential learning part. Learning to live together and learning to live together and live with others is the idea of promoting values of compassion and tolerance, and being understanding that resources are limited, and unless we preserve these resources for the benefit of humanity, we would have a generation coming after us who would not get the benefit of these resources that we have inherited and which we are enjoying. It could be environment, it could be climate, it could be natural resources, it could be resources that we have created and developed because of the human engineering feat, but these all have to be protected, for which we should have compassion and tolerance and move towards a climate of peace and coexistence rather than creating wars and destructing what are the resources available, or exploiting the nature to such an extent that you see ravages of earthquakes and torrential rain and floods that are happening. And finally, learning to be the most important one, where you are allowing individual potentials to be maximized, to grow and to develop. That individual potential of every single child needs to be nurtured, needs to be firstly recognized and nurtured. These are the 4 pillars which actually form the philosophical foundation and which led to the NEP 2020 having 2 major critical aspects. The 5 goals of access, equity, quality, affordability and accountability, and the 22 cardinal principles outlined in chapter 1 of the NEP 2020. And I'd urge every one of you present over here to have a look at the cardinal principles that have been given, which starts with recognizing the uniqueness of every single child and not condemning a child who is not necessarily good in academics, but maybe good in performing arts or maybe good in sports, and provide for nurturing all those talents for the holistic development of every child, rather than becoming judgmental, which many of you who are faculty like me, we are most likely to make that mistake of actually ruining the self-esteem of children and ruining their future, because we do not seem to recognize or appreciate that it is not just learning of math, science or engineering or medicine that goes to make an individual. It is understanding many, many aspects of life that go to make the holistic development of a child. and therefore we should be able to recognize, respect the talent and potential of every single child, whether healthy, not healthy, irrespective of the caste, class, creed, and provide them the opportunities for their holistic development, and which is what this policy recognizes as the first cardinal principle. Now, if that has to be possible, the present system that we are actually following does not allow that kind of flexibility. And that is why we have recognized the need for having flexible curricular structures, going to the idea, therefore, of multidisciplinary education, having flexible teaching learning methods, which would then allow moving from rote learning to experiential learning, moving from, let us say, memorizing to critical thinking, promoting the scientific temper and the spirit of inquiry, and most importantly, developing the 21st century skills which are necessary for meeting the global challenges. And recognizing within that the importance of language for actually developing their cognitive abilities. And that is why this policy strongly believes in the principle of multilingualism, because we believe that learning of various languages and more languages actually sharpens the intellect to such an extent that their ability to assimilate other subjects becomes more effective. And this relationship between language and cognitive development has promoted a principle of promoting multilingualism, starting with the idea of providing mother tongue education or instruction in the mother tongue in the early years of a child's learning process. And the emphasis thereon of early childcare education. I must mention that it is very important to understand NEP 2020 cannot talk of only higher education, because higher education is based on the foundation that happens starting from the ages 3 to 18. And therefore, because though this particular webinar may be focusing on higher education, the policy has recognized that learning is a very single continuum. It is one single continuum as far as the child's journey is concerned. We may divide it for administrative purposes into early childcare education or primary education or elementary education or secondary education and then higher education. That is only for functionality. Whereas as far as a policy is concerned and as far as the journey of a child is concerned, it is one single continuum starting from a very tender age of age 3 and going on when you reach to higher and technical and professional education as much as 22 or 23 years. But this whole thing is interconnected, and what impacts higher education will have a bearing from what has been the learning in the early childcare education. This impacts the school education. What takes place in school education impacts the higher education, and it is teachers who make this possible. Therefore, teacher education has been also seen, vocational education, adult education, and professional education embedded within higher education have been seen as very interrelated sectors and should not and must not be treated as separate and independent of each other. They are highly interrelated, and there is so much of synergy between these levels that if we as faculty, who are supposed to be the ones who conduct the education in this country, if we start looking at it in very myopic, short-sighted manners, then we are doing a great disservice to the profession that we have taken to become better teachers and to therefore provide and impart good quality education. So whenever I address a webinar, I speak with immense conviction, and I urge upon all the faculty and the leadership of that institution to understand this critical recommendations of the NEP 2020 in one single continuum and look at it in a totality. Coming back to the focus in terms of higher education, it is talking, I said, of flexibility, and therefore when we came to higher education, the current silo-based and discipline-specific education that we follow of arts, science, commerce, pharmacy, agriculture, engineering, technology, medicine, law, you have actually truncated all knowledge areas as if they were there in watertight compartments. And long before even the end of the 20th century, we have realized that knowledge is a very porous thing. It is a very permeable thing. It's like a sponge. where one discipline enters into another discipline. And if you treat them as separate compartments, you cannot allow for the flowering of the individual's talents, and you cannot allow for the holistic development of a student. And therefore, this policy has recommended moving away from silo-based and discipline-specific higher education streams to multidisciplinary education or holistic multidisciplinary undergraduate education, which in the draft NEP we have used the terminology of liberal arts, and that means the person can learn sciences or social sciences, engineering or technology or medicine and pharmacy or agriculture, music, vocational education, performing arts, sports, languages. Any of these combinations can be taken by a student, which means currently the Mahajanas College will have to start thinking in trying to understand that we will try to offer all the disciplines. And if right now you are not capable of doing it, then you can become a part of a higher education cluster. But as far as the policy goes, we have given you some possibilities of how it can be done. Now, for this purpose of allowing for multidisciplinary choice of courses, where a student may take as varied as maybe maths and music and coding and language and maybe a particular sport or maybe a performing art, if this is the combination, obviously we know that one college will not have all these faculty available. The student therefore has the flexibility to pick up these courses from other institutions. It could be anywhere in this country, or it could be a part of a geographical higher education cluster, or it could be through open and distance learning, or it could be a totally online, massive open online course. So the flexibility is given to the student to take admission in, say, Mahajanas College, but he will do only some courses from Mahajanas College, or he or she will do only some from there, but will pick up from other colleges, maybe in Mysore itself or in Bangalore or anywhere in this country, if it is an ODL course or a massive open online course. And if it is in the same geographical vicinity, it can be through a face-to-face mode. All these credits that the student is doing from a multiple set of institutions goes into what we call an academic bank of credit, which is customized to that student. So the flexibility is in terms of choice of courses. The flexibility is in the mode of learning. The flexibility is in the different types of institutions that he or she can do. The flexibility is also given in terms of the completion time. The person can do either a 3-year undergraduate program or a 4-year undergraduate program. A 3-year undergraduate program is also modular, in the sense, if we are accepting that we are part of lifelong learning opportunities, and where at the age of 19, at the end of my first year, I feel that I should go into the world of work, or maybe if I'm learning some performing arts, I go into actually learning something more in that performing arts. I can exit at the end of first year and I will still get a certificate. So it is made modular with the flexibility to exit and re-enter as per the needs of the student or as per the convenience of the student and what suits that learner specifically, and made not by treating that student as a dropout, but empowering that student by giving that student a certificate. If it is 1 year, 2 years, a diploma, 3 years, a degree. It could be like the student decides that I'm not going to do a 4th year, I'm going to do only a 3 years undergraduate program. The student is given a degree. The person who does the 4th year will be doing a bachelor's degree in holistic education and completing it with research. Then the student would be allowed to even go in for PhD directly. But if the student is only doing a 4-year multidisciplinary degree with majoring in 2 subjects, then we'll do a 1 year of master's and then go on if he or she wants to do PhD. Or the student is doing only, let us assume, a 3 years undergraduate program, then the student will do a 2 years of master's program. So you see, the flexibility at the undergraduate level is in the multidisciplinarity, in the choice of courses, the choice of institutions, the modes of learning, the number of years that the student wants to do, and at the same time not treat the student as a failure or a dropout, but at the end of every year, give that ability or the freedom to exit and re-enter, but give the student a certificate or a diploma or a degree, or finally a bachelor's with a 4-year program. we discontinued with MPhil program. And many are asking us, what was the rationale for doing that? I'm sure all of us sitting here as faculty know that MPhil as a degree had a value. One, it was an eligibility to join a PhD program. Two, it was treated as an eligibility to become an assistant professor. Today, it does not, an MPhil degree is needed for neither of these purposes. In effect, it is a degree which is obsolete. There is no joy or no valid reason why we should start continuing to offer a program which has outlived the purpose. Neither is it necessary to do a PhD program, because now you have a coursework within the PhD program where you learn research methodology. And at one time, MPhil was doing that particular part. And it is no longer seen as a qualification to join as an assistant professor, because today you have the NET and the state level eligibility test and the PhD program. This is the criteria that is there. So the MPhil program has been discontinued. But let me clarify here, because the mails that come into my mailbox are flooded with the questions that I am currently doing an MPhil program, has it become null and void? Please understand, a policy is a vision document. It lays down an aspiration where it would like to see the education of a country going forward. Policies do not lay down the guidelines, rules, and regulations. Currently, the regulator is UGC. And UGC, as long as it is existing and HESI is not coming into being, will have to bring out guidelines, rules, and regulations saying that MPhil becomes discontinued from such and such a date. Only then MPhil gets discontinued. And up to that time, you will have all validity for the MPhil course that you have done. It holds as good a value that we had when we completed our MPhil programs, and therefore one should not be having much concern on that front. It will all be done only with rules and regulations. Firstly, UGC will have to take a stock, how many universities students are registered for MPhil, how many of them are in that, which stage that they are, when are they likely to complete. First, they will have to stop admissions to the new MPhil programs. Only then the existing ones would then be completed and then treated as discontinued. So I hope this doubt many are asking gets reassured. Now the PhD program, people are asking, is there any change in that? The policy has not outlined to you what is the structure of a PhD program. As I mentioned, this is decided by the individual institutions themselves. And if there are any changes in the guidelines based on the policy recommendations in terms of multidisciplinarity, not having dual guides because you're taking up cross-discipline studies, these all will be formulated and laid down by the rules and regulations given by the regulator, whether it is the UGC or whether it is the Higher Education Commission of India. Now, let me come to the next aspect, higher education institutions in this country. Now, you all know that India has one of the largest higher education systems in the world, which has something to the effect of about 1,000 plus universities. We have 30,000 standalone institutions, largely in the area of teacher education, management, and so on, and 40,000 affiliated colleges. This is the structure, and we take pride in saying that India has one of the largest higher education systems in the world. The complexity of this higher education system increases because of the character of the higher education institution. Some are centrally funded institutions, others are state funded, some are private institutions, some are affiliating universities, some are unitary universities, some are deemed universities, and so on. We have in the policy said that all HEIs, including the IITs and the IIMs, will all have to be called as universities. Now, as I said, this is what the policy says. Finally, it is left to the ministry and the government to see how this gets translated. But as far as we are concerned, we were very clear that you do not create multiple categories of institutions. All higher education institutions are basically to be only called a university, and a university is one which will promote not just the creation of knowledge, not just the acquisition of knowledge, but also the creation of knowledge through research, that is teaching and research going hand in hand, which led us to a rationalization of the higher education institutions in this country as saying that some could be research intensive universities and some could be teaching intensive universities. So largely a rationalization of the higher education institutions, where we would like higher education institutions themselves to decide whether they would be focusing largely on undergraduate teaching with some degree of emphasis on research, like maybe Mahajanas would categorize themselves under the teaching intensive universities, or whether they are research intensive, which is largely focusing on research studies and research projects and postdoctoral studies, and still doing a little bit of undergraduate education in some specific areas because of the combination that they may want to provide for as a facility. But all these universities, we would like them to be having large campuses with a sizable number of students on the campuses so that they are not unviable higher education institutions. Now, the third category is the degree granting autonomous colleges, on which a lot of people have a lot of apprehensions and fears. You all are an affiliated college to the Mysore University, and Mahajanas College, we are saying in a period of 15 years, will itself become a degree granting autonomous college where students can go out with a certificate, not from Mysore University, but from Mahajanas University itself, or Mahajanas Autonomous Degree Granting University College itself. How will this journey take place? You see, affiliation as a system had a purpose. It was there because when we became independent and we wanted to provide access to higher education, not all institutions could become universities. So we created few large universities and enabled them or given them the powers that they can affiliate smaller institutions and the degree would be given by the university. But today it has become merely a revenue generating activity where universities control as many as 800 colleges, very unviable numbers, and 300 to 800 is the average size of affiliating universities. And all that these universities can do is to ensure that examinations are conducted twice a year and an academic calendar is being maintained. There is no emphasis on the quality of teaching learning, no emphasis on research that is taking place. Ultimately, you have created a system where a student goes out with a piece of paper which he calls or she calls a piece of degree, which has no value in the market and no jobs that are available with that degree. This system needs to be changed. And that is why we have said that the affiliating system will be gradually withdrawn to have autonomous degree granting colleges. But this is not going to take place overnight. It is a recommendation which will take about 15 years to materialize. And this would be done not by just washing away your hands from the colleges, but by a system of hand-holding by the university, by the state government, and mentoring them so that some quality benchmarks are achieved, accreditation is improved, and thereafter a graded system of autonomy will be given to become fully autonomous degree granting colleges. But we would like to see this whole system becoming a reality in a period of about 15 years. And let me mention that just because we are saying that the affiliating system will go, rural colleges will not get shut down, neither will colleges in unserved areas get shut down. It is only that these colleges which are in urban areas largely, which are affiliating to larger universities, it is their character which would be changed, on keeping with the aspect of equity and inclusion. Those in rural areas, those with even limited numbers will continue. They could then become constituent colleges rather than be remaining as affiliated colleges. So let us be clear that this rationalization is aimed at trying to bring about a kind of a structure of higher education institutions within the country. We have also said that every district, as far as possible, should have institutions of excellence, and which we call as MERUs, or multidisciplinary education and research universities. Even if we are not able to do that to the number that we may envisage, even if we have a few of them, it would be like model universities which can reach global standards of excellence, and which would then create a brand name that in India, you have MERUs who are supposed to be the state-of-the-art institutions of higher education, which are seen as residential universities and which can have large numbers, even as many as 25,000 students on such campuses. Now, let me now come to the equity aspect. So let me mention that this policy, whether it is school education or so, is talking in terms of the learner being at the center, the teacher being the driver of the change, and therefore empowering the teacher through a very strong teacher education program and making that teacher energized and motivated and incentivized, and provide the faculty development capacity building programs to even take up leadership positions, and empower the higher education institutions, which would be covered by my fellow panelist, Professor Dongre, and therefore I'll not touch upon the internal governance and the regulation part of it. But students, we want these students to have optimal learning environments and provide the kind of support that is necessary for them to participate in the vibrant life of the higher education institution through youth clubs, sport clubs, music clubs, poetry clubs, eco clubs, and so on. And for that, also provide for their physical fitness and their mental well-being through a very systematized method of counseling, not just the academic counseling, but also the psychological counseling and the emotional counseling and the social counseling that is necessary because of the stress that the students are facing in today's world. And it is equally important that they are provided the financial support through enhanced scholarships, and which brings me to the question of equity and inclusion. Now, for inclusion, many are asking why we did not talk about reservation. Please understand, reservation is a constitutional mandate, and no committee can do anything that is unconstitutional. Therefore, the committee did not feel it necessary to separately talk about reservation. It is already there and taken for granted and will continue as it exists. It can increase or it can decrease, left to the government, however, as and when they wish to change it. But what we have said is that all students have an equal right to access, have equal right of access to education, be it school education or higher education, or within higher education, the technical and the professional or any form of education. And within this, for this purpose, we will provide additional incentives and measures and strategies so that there is greater inclusion. And we used a terminology of socially and economically disadvantaged groups, or SEDGs, for including SCs, STs, women, OBCs, minorities, learning disabilities, physical disabilities, urban poor, transgenders, children of migrant labor, people living in vulnerable areas, geographically inaccessible areas or aspirational districts. All these categories come under SEDGs. We have said there could be gender inclusion fund, special education zones, setting up of hostels, providing other social inclusion fund, and enhanced scholarships. Both public and private institutions will provide enhanced scholarships so that all students will have equal access and financial means being provided to get good quality education. Now, importantly, for vocational education, before I go on to the aspect of internationalization and conclude with that, vocational education, we are actually trying to restore the dignity of vocational education. And we have a separate chapter on reimagining vocational education. But it is a cross-cutting theme. It is there for both school and higher education. In school, we have said we will start it at the middle school level. As you're aware, we have said about a 5+3+3+4 structure, which is not a physical restructuring, but only an academic and curricular restructuring. And at the middle school stage, that is not the first 5, which is the foundational, not the preparatory, which is the next stage of 6 to 8, 8 to 11 that we are talking, but the 11 to 14 years, we will have vocational crafts being taught. And for this purpose, even if there are no vocational teachers, India is blessed with a lot of craftsmen and local artisans. Their skills will be used, and their internships will be used so that students can get exposure to the vocational crafts, and also respect that working with hands is as much important as your cognitive learning. So the cognitive is important, the affective is important, and the psychomotor is also important. And that is what Gandhiji's Nai Talim all talked about, working with your hands. And we have started condemning it. Can you imagine an engineer who will not have the shop floor people who do the basic trades and who do the basic work at the shop floor? If we create a set of engineering institutions which only create engineers without the supporting people from the ITIs and the polytechnics, and without embedding them within the mainstream education, you will create a nation which cannot create any new engineering field, because you don't have the labor that supports that at all. And to use the word labor also is to be seen not in a derogatory manner, but to understand that whether it is carpentry or whether it is plumbing or whether it is electrical work or any other artisan trade that we are so blessed with, because India as a country promoted craftsmanship in its centuries ago itself, then we are doing a disservice, because world over we respect all these trades. Our people go and do that in other countries, but in our own country we seem to condemn it. So by introducing it in the class, in the middle school stage, from class 6 onwards, we are hoping that we will have a change in the attitude, and it would not be seen as separate from academic, but embedded within the academic itself. So in school, we have done away with the curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular. We are doing away with arts and science. We are also doing away with the vocational and the academic, and integrating that within the main academic part of it itself. Similarly, as far as higher education, the multidisciplinary education that we will be offering will include the vocationalization also, and the vocational subjects also. We need not see that as separate streams, and that is why the National Higher Education Qualifications Framework, which will decide on the mobility and the equivalence, will ensure that it is perfectly aligned to the National Skills Qualification Framework, which outlines the levels that are being acquired in certain skills, and that being aligned to the 3-year and 4-year undergraduate program or the postgraduate program, or even going up to the doctoral study. And the current BWOC programs will have to be remodified for the purposes of actually ensuring that vocational education is part of the main academic stream, rather than treating it as, meaning that even BWOC will have to be part of the multidisciplinary education, and you would not have a separate BWOC that will be there, but will be part of the main academic education itself. Bachelor's in whatever two majoring, it could be therefore a bachelor's where you major in maybe chemistry and maybe carpentry, or you can major in maybe physics and music. Similarly, you can take up physics and maybe plumbing or electrical work or whatever. So that segregation that we have between vocational and academic will go away from school education and from higher education and become a part of the holistic multidisciplinary education. And to ensure that this takes place, training for the teachers, providing the right kind of vocational instrumentation labs and high-end instrumentation labs. So I have been blessed to be a part of the Science, Technology and Innovation Policy. And we have urged the departments of science and technology and so on to actually lay down modern lab techniques with better instrumentation labs, so that vocational education, the exposure that students get are not in outmoded kind of laboratories, but in absolutely modern, contemporary, high-end kind of laboratories that are there, and which will also be able to use artificial intelligence, robotics, and big data and so on, rather than thinking that, no, this is only meant for the academic education and not so for the vocational education. So the importance of research in these areas is also important. And for vocational education, the last point I would like to mention on that is that we have recommended a national committee for integration of vocational education, so as to avoid the kind of danger we have done so far of it falling away from the stream, from both ends. Neither is it part of formal stream, nor is it recognized and respected at all. So we are embedding it and integrating it in school and in higher education. This would be driven by a new vehicle called the National Committee for Integration of Vocational Education. Now on research, I'll touch upon that. You are aware that we have recommended the National Research Foundation, which will be promoting and encouraging multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research. Will promote research not just in sciences and in technology, but in social sciences, Indian knowledge systems, Indian Ayurveda systems. It could be music, it could be languages, all areas, and at the same time it will embed all the new areas of artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on, so that research would be taken to a higher level, and importantly, nurture research in the state universities, which are today languishing, because you cannot encourage research suddenly when a student has become a master's level. Research needs to be actually nurtured right from school days. And the NRF, because it cannot go down up to the school levels, it will be focusing at least on the state universities and on undergraduate education. We have made internships in undergraduate programs mandatory so that people will have less disconnect between the world of education and the world of work. We are saying that teaching and research will go together. NRF will also be an important vehicle in taking forward research meant for the areas of Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and so on. We are also saying that students of the higher education should not just be based on the cognitive learning, but also on the capabilities of 21st century skills, of communication, of cognitive learning, of cooperative learning, of collaboration, teamwork, adaptability, so that they are actually equipped to make the changes depending upon the new requirements. And that is why we said that multidisciplinary education will allow students to have the basic knowledge of more than one area, so that we do not know what jobs will come tomorrow because of artificial intelligence and so on. At least they will have some exposure to other areas where, because of that exposure, plus the kind of 21st century skills, they may be able to adapt to the changing requirements. Lastly, I'd end with internationalization. All of us accept that mobility is one of the hallmarks of today's world. And it is important for us to understand that we should encourage student mobility, faculty mobility, but also institutional mobility. I'm glad in the introductory video, I heard that Mahajana's College has been home to students coming from 20 countries. That is internationalization of higher education. And we should not look at competition as being a dirty word. Healthy competition has always to be encouraged. We should not be like the frog in the well, which thinks that is the world in itself. We should know what is happening in other parts of the world. And obviously, any healthy competition that comes by allowing foreign universities to set up campuses here will only be an encouragement for us to rise up to the global standards. So in keeping with that, we have tried to promote the idea of institutional mobility both ways, Indian universities setting up campuses outside, and similarly foreign universities being allowed to set up campuses over here. And on technology and education, which is where I will end with, today we are sitting in a webinar because of the COVID pandemic, but we as a policy itself had recognized the importance of technology, not only for improving the access of education, but improving the quality of teaching learning, but also for educational administration and for data management of higher education institutions. And the chapter 24 on online education, which was written post-March after the pandemic hit the world, we have emphasized on the need for promoting digital platforms, but recognizing that as a country, we are not having access to digital devices. Not all of us are fortunate to have the kind of freedom that, the kind of luxury that we have today by sitting in this webinar. So digital divide is a reality. We need to recognize that, try to understand how we can use other media like radio and the television, including the print, and improve the capacities of teachers and students. Today, you are aware that when the COVID pandemic made it necessary for us to go for online examinations, UGC could not do it. Why is it could not do it? The individual preparedness of the parents, of the students, of the teachers, and the institutions made us the realization that though we may use technology a lot for our social media, for many other things, we are not equipped to use it optimally for all aspects of teaching, learning, and assessment and examinations, and even for teacher training. So the pandemic, in a certain sense, accelerated the use of technology. And it has also made this policy recognize the importance of online and digital learning by stating that we will have teacher training, institutional preparedness, and provide for all these efforts to take place in a coordinated manner, for which there will be a new dedicated unit within the Ministry of, already set up under the Ministry of Education. And one of the recommendations that this policy made was that education itself compasses so many things of culture, of sports, of youth development, of early child care education, of promoting women and child. All these are significant, and that is why we asked for the renaming of the Ministry of Human Resource Development to the Ministry of Education, and which has already been notified as the Ministry of Education. So the NEP 2020 is a forward-looking aspirational document which tries to empower learners, which tries to improve upon the capacities of the teachers while taking their service conditions and their training needs, and empower the higher education institutions to become autonomous, self-governing institutions, so that Indian education landscape will become globally one of the best in the world. And that is what we want our youngsters to aspire for, and that is what we want our country to move forward to. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, madam. You have given an in-depth view of the policy. It was an eye-opener for the students, parents, management, academicians for knowing the broadened view of education in India. Once again, I thank you, madam. Now the platform is open for Q&A. Over to my colleague, Mr. Karthik.
Good afternoon, ma'am. There is some sort of questions from the participants. First question is from our college, Mahajana's Education Society Secretary Vijayalakshmi Muralidharan, madam. Can few colleges come together to give vocational courses?
I didn't get your question.
Can few colleges come together to give vocational courses?
Cluster. Okay.
New colleges offer vocational courses.
Few colleges.
Few colleges, ma'am. Few colleges.
Ma'am, the question is, can few colleges cluster up to give the vocational courses?
Not only for giving the vocational courses, you can cluster up for offering any courses.
Okay.
You see, we are saying that we are saying in a cluster, not only vocational, but it can be music, it can be language, it can be engineering, anything. So there is nothing that prevents you to create a cluster for offering vocational courses.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. The next question.
The next question is from Atul Bengeri, sir. Madam, request you to please throw some light on vocational training and skill-based training.
No, we are already saying that vocational education and skill-based training, whether you call it as vocational or training, and it is actually world over, it is called the technical and vocational education and training. TVET is the word used globally. We are using it because in the Indianized language, we would like to call that as vocational education when it came to school. And when it came to higher education, we use the word skill-based higher education. Now we have a national skills qualification framework, because at one time we looked at vocational education as separate from the mainstream education. This policy is against the idea of having vocational education being seen as separate and independent of the mainstream education, and strongly believes and recommends in integrating vocational education or skill-based education or whatever nomenclature you use within the mainstream education, by allowing a student to choose a regular, what we consider in today's world, a regular course along with any vocational course. And all higher education institutions should have the freedom and the flexibility to do that. And as I mentioned to your earlier question, if it is not there in a specific institution, it can be done by from another institution, and the credits would be acquired by the student.
Thank you, ma'am. And another question from H.N. Satish. Can a student have freedom to pursue multiple programs parallelly? That means, can a student do UG degree in BSc in hospitality management and diploma in food processing in a span?
For us, the diploma is part of the 4-year program itself. We are saying that if you're doing an undergraduate program, at the end of first year, you'll get a certificate. At the end of the second year, you'll get a diploma. And so we will be having a total restructuring of the present nature of diploma and degree programs in the new structure. Now, when that new structure comes, let us assume that there is a 4-year undergraduate program, but there is some specific diploma course that is happening independent of this 4-year program. Then it would be dependent upon the regulator at that point of time, keeping in view the NEP recommendation, whether the regulator would allow for that. But as far as we are concerned, and as far as the NEP recommendation is concerned, let us say you are having a diploma in electrical engineering, and you are having a you are having a 4-year degree program where you are going to take, let us say, electrical engineering as one of your choices. There is no need for the student to do a separate diploma itself. If the student is doing more subjects of electrical engineering in the 4-year undergraduate program and does it and leaves it even at the second year, the student is entitled to get a diploma if in the first year and second year taken together, the student has done enough number of credits in electrical engineering itself.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question is from Atul Bengiri, sir. Any thoughts on the role of eminent citizens to participate in the educational activities at school and colleges level?
Yeah, we have actually put forward this idea of having volunteers, and where we have said that India as a country is facing a lot of shortages of teachers. At the same time, we have put forward some mission mode recommendations like the mission for foundational literacy and numeracy. Then we are talking in terms of mentoring. So under the national mentorship program, as well as this idea of having volunteers who can participate and help the schools for the foundational literacy and numeracy mission, we are thinking that we can take up retired people who are otherwise in good health. And it is only in India and a few developing countries that we have retirement ages and so on because of the resource constraints that we have. But otherwise, we want the services of the retired people to be used either as volunteers or as mentors, so that we may be able to not only benefit from their expertise, but also overcome the shortages that we currently have.
Thank you, ma'am. And another question is from Ravi Shankar, MD. What's the future of present accreditation systems like NBA and NAC?
No, so the accreditation under the new regulation, and I think Professor Dongre will be covering that. What we have said is that there will be a new body that will be called the National Accreditation Council, which can subsume within itself not only the NAAC, but also the NBA, and have multiple accreditation agencies to move towards a system of finally binary accreditation of all institutions either being accredited and those who are not accredited not being allowed to continue itself. So NBA and NAC will have to go into this new subset that we will be creating called the National Accreditation Council, but that is only an umbrella body which can have number of other accrediting agencies including the NBA and the NAAC.
Okay, the Q&A is done.
Thank you, ma'am. The question and answer session is completed. Over to you.
Thank you.
Shambhavi, madam.
Thank you, madam. Srimati Vasagi, assistant.
You thank her for joining.
So we are starting with the technical session 2. Now I request Srimati Vasagi, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to introduce Dr. Yashwant Dongre, the guest speaker of session 2.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to introduce Dr. Yashwant Dongre, the guest speaker of session 2. Professor Dongre holds a PhD in Commerce and has served as Professor of Commerce for 36 years and Director, Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation Board at the University of Mysore, India. After superannuating from this position, he is serving as a research and accreditation consultant at the same university. Professor Dongre has held many administrative positions that include Director of Postgraduate Center, Dean of the Faculty, Minister of University, and Acting Vice Chancellor of the University of Mysore. Dr. Dongre did his postdoctoral research at Ritsumeikan University, Kyoto, Japan during 1992-93 and 2001. He was a visiting overseas researcher at Graduate University for Advanced Studies, Osaka, Japan during 2008-9 and a Japan Foundation Fellow at University of Tokyo during 2013 globally. He has published over 100 articles in national and international journals and magazines. He has also published 8 edited books and written widely both in Kannada and English newspapers. Professor Dongre served as consultant to high-powered committee on cooperatives set up by the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India, the recommendations of which paved the way for the 97th Constitutional Amendment in 2012. Dr. Dongre is actively involved in the activities of International Cooperative Alliance Asia Pacific Research Committee. He serves as the co-secretary of ICAAP Committee on Cooperatives in Educational Institutions ever since its inception. At present, he is serving as the chairman of a subcommittee constituted by the Task Force on Implementation of New Education Policy in Karnataka State. On behalf of SBRR Mahajana First Grade College and Department of Commerce, I welcome you, sir, for this session.
Thank you, Vasili Madam. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Very good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible? Can you hear me? And am I audible?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah, you are audible, sir.
Yeah, can you see the slide?
Yes, yes.
Yes,
Okay.
you can, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let me begin with the first, I think, a few very introductory kind of things, which I think is necessary for us to understand what we are talking about. First and foremost, I think you made a very good decision in having these 2 panelists today. Madam Shamshu, I think, is an insider who has been part of the drafting of this entire policy, been part of the government, and she could provide us a view, an insider's view of the whole exercise. Whereas I am a sort of an outsider, I've never been part of this process until the task force, which is set up in Karnataka, decided to in turn set up 2 subcommittees. So my role actually started when the task force set up 2 subcommittees, one on curriculum, the other one on regulation and governance. And I was asked to head this subcommittee on regulation and governance. We have now submitted our report to the task force, and the task force in turn, I think, is combining our 2 committees' reports and submitting an action plan to the state government. But I have been an insider in the sense I have been in higher education for a very long time, more than 4 decades, and of course quite a keen student of what has been happening in the part of the policy. To really get a feel of the NEP, I think we should go beyond the officially announced document, which is under 70 pages. We should actually go into the DNEP, the Draft National Education Policy, which came in 2019, and which is more comprehensive. A lot of things related to the nuts and bolts are actually available there. So I think I appeal to all the teachers in particular to read the official policy, and at the same time, it's accessible, in the public domain. You access the DNEP and go through that as well. It answers many questions. The second thing, which also is very important, is, as Madam Shamshu has said, please remember, this is only a policy. This is not an act. This is not a legislation. Therefore, a lot of questions that we often ask are actually related to regulations, so we cannot ask this to the policy. The policy sets a direction. Okay. For example, if you keep everything aside and just read this policy, it reads, it's very lyrical. It reads like a romantic novel. There are so many dreams that have been stated there. So what does this policy do? It sets a direction for the rules to be drawn up. In fact, in the policy itself, therefore, they have said that there is going to be an implementation guideline issued. Based on the implementation guideline, I think the state governments are at the state level, so many things will have to be done because higher education is in the concurrent list. So both the center and the state have their role. If they cannot join hands, this cannot be implemented. This is also very, very important for us to know. Now, what the Ministry of Education now has done is, after the NEP has come, they have again asked for very specific implementation suggestions. They have identified actionable points put up in the website, and I think the window that was there for giving suggestions just closed a few days ago. And we all hope that based on all the input that is now received, we are going to get an implementation guideline, and the implementation guideline will set a more concrete tone for how things are going to shape up in the days to come. Therefore, please don't be under the impression that everything will change from the next academic year. Also, NEP has given in its framework itself a kind of a 15-year time frame for institutions to evolve and reach a certain stage. Therefore, whatever change that is going to take place is over a period of time. It is going to be quite slow. There will be enough time for us to really adjust to the new situation that is going to emerge. Also, she made a very important point that this is a very comprehensive report that actually covers all gamuts of all gamuts of education, not just higher education. So education is seen as a continuum. That's a very right word that she used. So changes that have to take place will have to start taking place right from the bottom. So that means if there is going to be a decision that let us first think about the school education and then over a period of time change higher education, quite possible. So all these ifs and buts are there. We have to keep that in mind. Look at NEP as a direction setting document and explore the possibilities of how things are going to change or how things might change. So this is something very, very important. With this in the background, I'll focus only on the regulation and governance part. Part of what I'm going to say is taken from the NEP document. Part will be my observations. And when I do that, I keep Karnataka as my focus because again, you may know the structures, the institutional structures and the regulations governing higher education vary from state to state. It is not common. For example, in case of Karnataka, we have a situation of multiple legislations. I think all of you know, we have a Karnataka State Universities Act, then we have a separate legislation for the Vishweshwara Technological University, another legislation for the Medical University, and there are separate legislations for non-affiliating state universities, and each of the private university has a separate legislation. I think we easily have anything around 30-40 different legislations. So this may not be the scenario in other states. Therefore, finally, how things shape up depend on the existing situation in the state, and what is likely to happen is what we can say at present. So what I'm going to do is briefly look at what the NEP has stated about regulation and governance, what it has in its mind when they were talking about it, and what kind of institutional structures have been suggested, and how it might change the existing rules of the game. It might, always I say it might change like that. So this is what I'm going to cover briefly, and then I think at the time of discussion, I'll try and elaborate if necessary. Okay, so what is the observation made by the NEP about the present status of regulatory structure? It is said that the present regulatory structure shows heavy-handedness, that is too much of regulation, it is almost interventionist. I think most of us who have been in the universities and colleges probably have been feeling this, that every time that we want to do something, there is a kind of a regulation, and this regulation comes in the way, and changing that part of the regulation is not possible because it is done, somewhere. So these kinds of things are there. And then there is concentration of power with a few bodies. For example, a college will have to simultaneously be looking towards different power centers. Part of the power for Mahajana, for example, an affiliated college, part of the power lies with the university to which you are affiliated, part of the power lies with the UGC, part of the power lies with the state higher education department. So there are these kinds of powers that are being there with certain bodies, and an educational institution as such, which is actually providing education, is bound by these kinds of bodies. So this is another very important problem. Many educational institutions, I think, feel suffocated in this kind of a situation. That's been rightly observed by the NEP. There is also a lot of conflict of interest in the way higher education institutions actually operate. Let me take one example. For example, this is a governance issue. Let me take, for example, a university. In a university, you have a governing body, and that governing body, in our case, it is called the syndicate. Now, the syndicate is chaired by the Vice Chancellor. The Vice Chancellor is also the CEO. Actually, he is the implementing authority. In other words, the same person who chairs the meeting of policy making is the person to implement. So if you look at this way, there is a conflict of interest. Now, NEP draws example of an independent board of governors, a model which you find in case of IITs and IIMs, okay, where you have a board of governors. The chairman of the board of governors is not the director of the institute. The director of the institute is only a member of the board of governors, right? So this kind where you avoid this conflict of interest. So that has been noted, and lack of accountability. You've been, I think, seeing many of the issues both with the institutions, higher education institution, with the university, with the regulatory bodies, scandals coming up. We are not pinpoint and hold people responsible because our regulatory systems do not really provide enough of strength to really do that. So in all, what we have now in the regulatory structure is it's an overarching regulatory structure, but not an effective regulatory structure. Therefore, NEP suggests that you will have to have a regulatory system which is very effective, but not too big. In fact, a very beautiful word is being used, light but tight. Okay, that's the word used, light but tight regulation. I'll come to that a little later. Now, what the NEP is suggesting, a couple of points which I am going to talk about might be already touched upon by Madam Shamshu, so I am not going to elaborate on that. Other things I'll slightly elaborate. So there is an institutional restructuring that has been suggested. Partly it refers to the regulation and partly it refers to the way education is imparted. So redesigning of the university and college structures. For example, already resource person talked about doing away with affiliation system. Okay, so I'll come to that a little later. So there is going to be evolution of institutions, most of them going to be autonomous degree awarding institutions, whether you call it a university or a autonomous degree awarding institution that gives a undergraduate degree. So this is the structure. That means, see, the existing structure is to be, we should be thinking totally outside the existing structure. This is very, very important. We are going to see probably a situation of all unitary universities, no affiliating university. Okay. So that's what the NEP has proposed. Then in the regulatory reforms, reforming the legislations and regulatory institutions. So both are being mentioned. So you need to have a kind of a rules, a framework, and also a kind of a regulatory structure which should not be confusing, which should not be duplicatory in nature, which is easy for us to really manage. That's the structure. Then the governance mechanism, which is focused more on the internal governance issues of higher education institutions. So these are the key areas which I am going to touch upon today. Okay, so NEP seeks to make the regulation light but tight, as I said. So you should not be having, for example, if you look at Karnataka's University Act, Karnataka State University Act, I think this is about the size of that act is, I think, as big as or more than the NEP document, right? And so many sections and so many complicated things being added. That makes things more complicated than actually, facilitating, right, transparent, very, value-based kind of institutions being run. Then separation of regulation, academic standard setting, and accreditation and funding. This is the other one. There is a lot of overlapping that takes place now, duplicatory roles and all that. So that is to be, separated. And creating distinct, independent, and empowered bodies for the above, for regulation, standard setting, accreditation, for everything, creating an empowered body. And remember, all of them working as independent, autonomous kind of agencies handling this with as less intervention from government as possible, or no intervention from government, something like this. Now, this is exactly where at the state level, you really doubt whether we have that will to implement all these ambitions, all these dreams of NEP, because we have systems where the state is too much into this process. So can the state really be in a mood to give it up? That question. I'll come to that in my probably last slide. So put in place proper checks and balances, focus on independence through accreditation and graded autonomy. Already this also been touched, but slightly I'll touch upon that. Transparency and accountability through compliance and disclosure. Now this is, I think, a very, very important thing where the NEP is talking about ensuring transparency and accountability through a technology platform, a compliance and disclosure system based on a technology platform, where I think on a real-time basis, higher education institutions keep reporting, providing information, so that you say something and you do something else should not happen or cannot happen. So that's the kind of system that the NEP wants the state or the higher education body to release NEP. Okay, now what is the proposed regulatory framework? All of us know that as of now, we have multiple institutions, even at the national level. You have the UGC, the AICTE, and then the Bar Council of India coming in, the Medical Council coming in, and then you have the architecture, another, and agriculture research, another. So there are a lot of bodies that regulate, that set the standards, and many times it is confusing. And in many cases, you have to really go both for UGC as well as for AICTE. In some cases, you have to go both for NAC as well as NBA. So there have been multiple institutions, overlapping of the roles, duplicatory roles, confusions. To avoid all that, NEP is proposing that there is going to be a Higher Education Commission of India, which is the umbrella organization. That's the topmost organization that under which the entire education mechanism would really work. And it will have 4 verticals. Each one again is an independent vertical. One is the National Higher Education Regulatory Council. So this is a single point regulator ensuring and facilitating compliance and disclosure through technology-based transparent system. So you are going to have one regulatory authority. Then you are going to have a National Accreditation Council. Somebody asked this question in the first part of it. So this is not NAAC, but this is NAC. And what the National Accreditation Council will do is it will develop norms and set benchmarks for accreditation, and it will recognize accrediting agencies. Okay. So that means we are going to have multiple accrediting agencies. It's something like franchising of the whole process. But the standards are common. The standards are set and overseen by the National Accreditation Council. Then there is Higher Education Grants Council, so which is separate. Now, for example, for a typical college or a university, UGC is everything. You go to UGC for regulation, you go to UGC for funding, everything. Now, this is being separated, so you are having a Higher Education Grants Council, which provides scholarships and development grants. All these kinds of monetary issues are being taken care by the Higher Education Grants Council. Then you have the General Education Council, which is to develop National Higher Education Qualification Framework. This is the standard setting body, and this qualification framework is in sync with National Skill Qualification Framework. This exactly where, as Madam Shamshu said, your skill development, vocational education are all integrated in the higher education system. So there is nothing like a separation that this is only a vocational training center, this is only a degree awarding, undergraduate, this is only a postgraduate, something of that kind. It's part of the higher education, but the standards are being set by the General Education Council. So the overall institutional structure at the national level that NEP has envisaged is creating an umbrella organization, namely Higher Education Commission of India, and under that 4 verticals. One is a single window for regulation, the other is a single window for accreditation, but please remember, unlike NAC, at present now we approach NAC for accreditation, but under the new system, you don't approach NAC for accreditation, but you approach one of the accreditors recognized by NAC for your accreditation. That means every educational institution will have choice from where, where do you go for accreditation. Higher Education Grants Council, that's again a single window for you to approach for all kinds of financial assistance, and General Education Council, which will basically determine the standards, the benchmarks, for example, if there is a degree to be awarded, what is the attributes, the graduate attributes, for example, what should actually go into that degree? It is not the curriculum, please remember, it is not that they will give you a ready-made curriculum and ask you to implement. The curriculum is again going to be developed by individual institutions. But the general framework for how you are going to approach that is something. For example, in the context of Karnataka, the other committee headed by my Professor Tinegowda on curriculum, what they were trying to do is give kind of a suggestive kind of a thing. For example, how many minimum credits of what should be there, something like this, but not suggesting the actual curriculum. So this is the way the institutional structure is going to emerge over a period of time, and I think this will enable a lot of clarity. We will know whom should we approach for what, and there is no duplication, these kinds of things. This structure generally works for most of the higher education institutions. Okay. This restructuring, as I said, which takes supposed to take about 15 years. In 15 years, this whole system is to emerge. First stage will be a detailed guidelines will be given by the central government, by Ministry of Education, hopefully soon. There may be already things going on in this, and maybe Madam Shamshu probably will be aware of this. Existing professional councils will evolve into professional standard setting bodies. So the question immediately that comes to our mind is, what is going to happen to all these institutions? What is going to happen to UGC, to AICTE, and so many other councils that are there, all of them? Okay, they are going to be closed down, but their roles will probably change. One example will be, for example, UGC might become one vertical for example, Grants Council. And I know hypothetically, I'm saying, So their roles, I think, will change, but they are going to have one specific role. That's how they are going to change. And many of these professional bodies, like agriculture, architecture, all of them, they would still continue to be kind of a professional standard setting bodies for the respective professions. So this is a suggestion, this is a direction that is given by the higher education, the national higher education policy. Under the new regulatory mechanism, through an accreditation and graded autonomy, all higher education institutions evolve into autonomous degree awarding institutions. Again, this has been already explained. We are not going to have a kind of a affiliation system where you remain affiliated to a university and university awards degree. It is different from the autonomous college system that is present today, because under today's autonomous college system also, for example, Mahajanas is an autonomous college, but degree is not awarded by Mahajanas. You set the curriculum and you make the evaluation, but finally degree comes from University of Mysore. All this will change, and as Madam Shamsu said, Mahajanas itself can evolve into a degree awarding, autonomous degree awarding institution. But this is done through a system of accreditation and graded autonomy. Again, these words are very familiar to us. Accreditation you have gone through. Graded autonomy in a way is present now under UGC. We all know that institutions which have, I think, a CGPA of 3.26 up to 3.5 under NAC accreditation, they were awarded the grade 2 autonomy, and institutions with 3.5 above awarded grade 1 autonomy. So certain degree of autonomy has been already given to universities. Through the accreditation process, your institution will become a autonomous degree awarding institution. Okay, so you might also become a university, a teaching university. You might also evolve into a research university, and NEP has made it very clear. They made these three categories, but these are not kind of a superior subordinate kind of structures, nor are they fixed structures. There is a mobility that is always possible for an institution from one level to the other. So that kind of a process would be setting, and every institution will evolve into large sized multidisciplinary degree awarding institution. Now multidisciplinary is also very important in the context of Karnataka, because as you know, in our case, universities too are restricted to offer programs under different disciplines. For example, a university cannot offer a engineering program or a medical program because there are separate universities for that. Now those things will change. All educational institutions can have all disciplines. And very, very important one, the word liberal art is being used in NEP. As Madam very rightly said, we will be coming out of this thinking, namely there is a BCom, there is a BA, there is a BSc, there is a science, there is commerce, these things will go off. We will have a lot of cutting across of the disciplines as a choice for the student. Obviously, they can be pursuing so many other things. Okay. Maybe when it comes to the actual regulation part, one would say, okay, in the main discipline, you need to have so much credit to get a degree. So those things will come. But that kind of a direction is being set now in a time frame of about 15 years. So hope I am making things clear how the system is going to get restructured, and this is an institutional restructuring that is going to take place to have a kind of a regulation, and also to ensure autonomy and independence of the institutions, hoping that this will avoid all confusions, duplications, and quality enhancement will take place. I'm sorry. Okay. Just a second. Yeah, now, if this is the overall scenario, let us try to make it more specific in our context. Taking our state as an example, I am just trying to put it so. So what might happen in our state? Karnataka is, as Madam Shamshu said, Karnataka is the first state to now put in place a mechanism to implement it. The task force is already in place, and the government has made it very clear that they are very keen to implement NEP, and so I think they are already one step. They have taken a step in this direction. Now, what can happen in Karnataka? I am just trying to say that possibilities. Multiple legislations may be replaced by one single comprehensive legislation, which is also a need. Okay, or there may be that there is one legislation related to state institutions, one legislation related to private institutions, or something like that. But that may not happen, because in that manner you cannot address the real spirit of MEP. So this one single legislation, which is very comprehensive, will provide for the mechanisms of running a higher education institution as autonomous quality institutions with transparency and accountability. That's the whole idea. That's most likely to happen. Establishment of a State Higher Education Commission. I am just using a word, State Higher Education Commission, because at the national level there is a National Higher Education Commission. So you will have to have a regulatory body. You will have to have one institution, an umbrella organization at the state. Right now in Karnataka, as you know, we have a Karnataka State Higher Education Council. Not all states in India have that. Please remember, Karnataka again is one of the one of the few states in India that have a higher education council. But higher education council doesn't have any regulatory power. It is more of a advisory kind of a thing. Earlier we used to have the Inter-University Board. In that place we now have the Karnataka State Higher Education Council. But most of the regulatory role, I think, is done by the State Department of Higher Education. Okay, so the minister is part of the Higher Education Council. The Education Minister is part of the Higher Education Department. So it is more of a higher education department. Now, establishment of a State Higher Education Commission would mean that you are now going to have an autonomous agency detached from the state, which is going to oversee managing of the higher education in the state. So some such institution will have to come. There may or may not be verticals under that. For example, some verticals may be needed. For example, a funding vertical may be needed, because you will have to fund, apart from, you can't depend only on the national funding. There will have to be state funding of higher education. So a funding vertical for that may be required. You may not need a accreditation vertical at the state level, because accreditation is going to be managed by NAC, and there are going to be institutions for accreditation recognized. So there is no such thing required. There may or may not be need for a vertical for standard setting for like the General Education Council. You can simply adopt that itself, or maybe you can have one because the state situation might change. So there may or may not be verticals, but there will have to be kind of a State Higher Education Commission, whatever going to be its name, that is going to function as a autonomous regulatory body. Changed role as a consequence of this, changed role of Department of Higher Education and Department of Collegiate Education. Now, for example, as of now, I think these two are very important for every college. Department of Collegiate Education is very, very important. Under the new system, we don't need a Department of Collegiate Education. Okay? We don't actually need a Department of Higher Education with the government, but it might be necessary still, because government after all owns institutions. Many institutions are actually owned by the government, funded by the government, established by the government. Therefore, you still need a higher education department for that purpose. But most of what the higher education department is currently doing is going to be part of the task of the State Higher Education Commission, and probably there will be no need for a collegiate education, Department of Collegiate Education. So that is going to be the scenario, likely scenario. Doing away with affiliation system. So over a period of time, universities will not be doing this so-called very important work of affiliation anymore. That means Mysore University also will emerge as a unitary university, But Mysore University itself might start its own undergraduate programs, its own engineering, medicine, all of that. Similarly, Mahajanas also might evolve into a autonomous body. It can have its own engineering, medicine, all those kinds of things. But neither Mahajanas nor University of Mysore will have any affiliated colleges. And in doing so, in really going for that kind of a system, universities have an important role. The NEP states that also. There is a lot of hand-holding that is to be done. Universities will have to identify institutions, help them to evolve into autonomous institutions. Just as now UGC calls upon universities to encourage their affiliated colleges to become autonomous colleges. Similarly, that process will go on. I think independent institutions will do the hand-holding for institutions to emerge as independent. However, if for specific reasons, some institutions cannot, let me say, before that, evolving into large-scale multidisciplinary institutions, there is also possibility of mergers and consolidations. That means different institutions can join together and create one institution. So that's a possibility, because as a single institution, you will not be able to grow that big. So 2 or 3 institutions can merge. You create one institution, just as it happens in the corporate setting. So that can happen. I know, again, ifs and buts. I am only thinking of this. So that even that process can take place. Institutions can emerge as larger institutions. And the institutions which cannot do that, there is for example, an institution in a typical rural area with a few hundred students, and that is very, very important because of the need for access to higher education. So in a situation of that kind, such institutions will become constituent colleges of the university, which means the university will have a larger role in actually running those institutions. Now, what's the benefit of that? The benefit of that is that this small institution gets to share the infrastructure, share the resources available with the university, and therefore quality can be improved. So this is a kind of a vision that has been set, and evolving of multidisciplinary higher education institutions. Now, the crux of this whole thing, which I think very beautifully stated by Madam Shamsu about multidisciplinarity, this compartmentalization. One analogy that always comes to my mind is that if you have a institution where multiple disciplines are offered, and you have a hostel, in a hostel room there are 4 students in one room. One is a medical student, one is an engineering student, one is a sociology student, one is a business student. How much time they spend together? What is the kind of interaction that takes place between a sociology student and a medical student and a technocrat? How they can each learn, from the other. This, I think, is very, very significant thing which we have lost in our system. So, and there are so many other things. Of a student being in a position to take a course that is related to technology. I am a sociology student, but I am interested in a course on technology. There is a technology student who is interested in sociology, in rural development. So these kinds of cutting across kind of things are possible, wherein you are going to have a technocrat emerging as an efficient technocrat to come out with rural, technology for rural benefit. Now, these are the things which we are, I think, not getting enough these days. So those kinds of possibilities are there. That is what the restructuring is all about in terms of regulation. Yeah, about the governance, I think I just missed one point. About the governance, the whole focus is on separation of policy making and implementation, and trying to have a board of governor, and the board of governor is going to be the final authority for everything in the institution. For a typical university, starting from creating the posts to filling up the posts to deciding about the infrastructure, be the decision of the board of governors. And the director or the vice chancellor, who is the CEO, who is a member of that board of governor, is the implementing authority. Of course, this board of governors sets the policy and also is responsible, is accountable, because it is the board of governors who will be reporting to the regulatory authorities. So this mechanism is something which I think is similar to the national level institutions that will come to all higher educational institutions, which again is a big challenge, because many of these things are the kind of things where vested interests start bringing in pressure. That's where I'm talking about the challenges. You look at it as a policy, the first challenge starts with this being a policy, whether the state governments accept it, they are willing to implement it. For political reasons, for example, if they are not willing, all these kinds of things will start emerging in this kind of a policy. So I'm not saying that in all states this is going to be implemented, in the same manner. In some states where the state governments, I think, are willing to do it, it might be done earlier than in a few other states. Now, the biggest challenge for me is coming out with the implementation guideline, because till such time, the policy looks like a wish list. So when there are implementation guidelines, I think things will become more clear. That is a step where we start really working towards. For example, as of now, you cannot really pick up and say this is bad in this policy, because all good things are being thought about. But when there is an implementation mechanism, implementation guideline that comes up, you will be able to say, okay, this might lead to this kind of negative thing or this kind of a positive thing. Therefore, the important challenge now is to convert the wishes that are there in the policy, the dreams that are there in the policy, into an implementable framework. That's the first challenge. We hope the government will soon do that, and then we will be in a position to have much better idea about how these structural changes will take place, how regulatory changes will take place. Second is the clarity of roles of the national and state level bodies. As I said, it's a subject of concurrent list. So what should the national bodies do, what the state bodies should do, whether it is going to be a hierarchical relationship or how different it would be, whether the state bodies will again be autonomous, whether the state bodies will make necessary changes to national bodies. So some of these kinds of things, what is going to be the relationship? For example, we are going to have an education commission, will under the education commission, or will it be simply one of the constituent of the regulatory institution? So these are to be sorted out. Overcoming the bureaucratic hurdles, which I think is very, very significant, because we are looking towards bringing in the regulation, in the laws, that is legislations, in the system, downsizing of certain systems, closing of certain departments, parting with some of our powers. So these are the things that are involved. So how the structure, that is existing structure, will react to it, how willing they will be to do it. This is a very important question. Addressing resistance from learners and providers of higher education. Are we all ready for this kind of a system? For example, as institutions, are we ready to become independent? As teachers, are we ready? In fact, one of the very, very important thing to realize the aspirations of NEP is a human resource. And when I say human resource, it is the teachers. Okay, so that's very, very critical. I think we need to actually prepare all this. It's not going to be so very easy. Preparing the human resource, in particular teachers, then administrators and staff. So these are all challenges. So 15 years is the timeline. We might say, okay, there is a fair amount of time, but whether the 15 years is enough to do all this also is a very, very significant thing. So we need to overcome these challenges, and if we have to really think of a qualitative kind of a thing. But please remember, a lot of us have always complained about the existing system. I think as a teacher in the university, I have always complained, say, okay, if only I were to have freedom, I would do this. As an affiliated institution, you would have thought, okay, if only you were to have freedom, you would have done this. There are so many things we keep complaining about government. about university, so many things. Here is an opportunity now to come out of that and then say, okay, if I am good, it is because of me. If I am bad, it's because of me. That's a kind of an opportunity that we have in the new national education policy. And I think that is something which we are all excited about. So let me briefly touch upon as a last part, what are the implications of this? From the positive side, from probably negative side, a few, and then end with my one small observation. There are many that we can talk about. I am just listing 2-3 here. The first one is large number of autonomous HEIs with lesser geographical restrictions, greater competition, greater choices for learners. Okay. Now, imagine, for example, in Karnataka now we have some 20 or 30 universities, but we might have 100 autonomous degree awarding institutions, 200 autonomous degree awarding institutions. Okay. And then these institutions will be more flexible. They will be offering varieties of programs. There are possibilities where a learner might pursue some credit in one institution, a set of credit in another institution, still might get a degree from one parent university. There's so many of these things that are happening. So we are, on the positive side is that now you are going to have a scenario where the choices for the learners will be much more. This I think is very positive. Okay. Similarly, good opportunity for increasing GER. I think we all know in South India, Karnataka lags behind other South Indian states also in terms of the GER in higher education. We have a very ambitious kind of a target. We have to reach out to 35%, 40%, then 50%. It cannot be done unless you have large number of institutions. So it's a good opportunity. And then you are putting, all these together, vocational education, professional education, regular education, everything under one institutional structure. So it is easy now for students to access higher education. Therefore, I think that way probably good opportunity to increase GER without sacrificing quality. Because in our eagerness to increase our GER, for example, a couple of years ago, I think all of you know, state government came with a circular stating that all institutions should increase number of intake by 10%. That means if your intake for a particular program is 100, you make it 110. They said to universities also. Now, with this, there is a danger. The danger is you don't have infrastructure. Okay. You don't have place to sit, you don't have furniture to sit, you don't have laboratory, but you have to increase 10%, 20%. So you might enroll, but you cannot do justice. Okay. So those kinds of things are not the right way of really increasing GER. The GER to be increased without compromising with quality. That chance is now available. An opportunity for interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary learning. All of us, I think, know that as a college, as a university in Karnataka, now you have very restrictive area, and if it opens up, then nothing like that. So, like that, there are many positive things. There are a few negative things. I don't say negative, but doubts and things of that kind. For example, access and equity. NEP talks at length about it. They very much want to ensure access and equity. But when you are going to implement, we cannot now say this. The fear that a lot of people have is that when you are going to have institutions of higher standard, a lot of institutions, especially when you do away with affiliation system, where the degree is coming anymore from the university, are there chances that a lot of institutions will be left out, that they will be compelled to close down? Okay, and it is not that you are closing down; they are compelled to close down. And when this happens, is it going to be a problem of access? Okay, so these kinds of questions will come. What is going to be the cost? Because we expect all institutions to have good quality, good infrastructure. NEP talks about an institution with a student strength of 5,000, possibly, or mostly all the students to be in-campus students. That means you need to even provide hostel facilities for all of them, things of that kind. There is going to be huge investment that is required in higher education. Can we really be bringing in so much? There is already a difference between the investment proposed under DNEP and NEP. I think when we were talking about the draft policy, we were talking about an investment in the range of about 15-20% of the GNP on higher education, whereas NEP talks something like 6%. Now with that investment, can we really realize this? Okay. And if institutions, private institutions make huge investments, what is going to happen to the fee structure? How are this going to be, compensated? There may be loan systems, scholarship systems, all that, but we have to put all of them in place. And is it really going to work? This kind of a doubt, I think, would emerge. Resource mobilization for HEIs, from where do they bring all the money, right? So government institutions, okay, government might bring the money. What about private institutions? Of course, a lot has been said in the NEP that there will have to be greater institution-industry interface, and there will have to be resources flowing from the alumni, from the industry, all that. We have been, of course, talking about it a lot already in the last 10 years, but not much headway has been done in this. So how are we going to mobilize the resources, especially the private institutions? So these are a few doubts that would emerge. Finally, of course, I would say that any system that we are going to put in place is only a facilitative system. We have had policies in the past, we have made changes in our education structure in the past, but over a period of time, we have found that we have been effectively diluting many of them, if not all. Now, who does this? For me, it is the people who do this. So finally, with all these ambitious plans, realizing this depends on the people. People got the systems. Therefore, the central thing for effective implementation of NEP is the human resource. Within the human resource, the most significant thing, I think, is the teacher fraternity. Because if the teachers have successfully, if they pass through that benchmark of quality, I am sure they will in turn imbue the quality among the learners. So that, I think, is very, very significant. And preparing teachers, the next generation of teachers, I think for the next generation of institution is going to be the most important task. And equally, of course, accountable and visionary administrators, which I think is going to be the same. If you simply change institutions, give them different names, and if the same people who are heading the institutions now will head those institutions, it is not going to really make the change. Okay. So NEP really talks about who should head the board of governors. When they say, the NEP says a person with very high societal image, a very high, considered as a person with a very high value and standard. That means by looking at the person who heads the board of governors, everybody should understand that this institution cannot go wrong. Such people. Okay. So if we succeed in getting such people in administration, and if we succeed in getting teachers who can really understand this and deliver this, then and only then NEP can become successful. Otherwise, we will be again down the line 10 years, 20 years looking for one more education policy probably. That's my take. Thank you very much.
Sir, for enlightening us about the governance issue of NEP. Now the platform is open for Q&A. Over to my colleague, Mr. Karthik.
Yes, sir. This question is from Shailesh Ragaras. There has been a lot of hue and cry for more than a decade that none of the Indian universities have found place in the top 200 world-class institutions. How the NEP 2020 is handy over to overcome this global ranking issue?
Well, there are two or three different things. First is about the ranking itself. I don't know whether you heard our education minister. At that time, it was MHRD, Minister of HRD. This time, when the national NIRF was announced, he was making a remark that why should our institutions be thinking about global ranking. I think we should develop a ranking system where other institutions from other countries will come and seek ranking with us, something like this. So the whole idea of ranking itself has its good, not so good, so many things. Though, of course, yes, I agree, it definitely gives us a fair idea of certain minimum standards. The why we have not reached that level, there are multiple reasons. And NEP keeps that very much in its mind when it is talking about changes. It is not that NEP is going, NEP is put in place and in next 10 years you are going to have 10 Indian institutions in the top 100. It is not that. But it is providing space for the educational institutions to evolve into better quality institutions. It is seeking to, build a structure, regulatory system or overall structure where institutions will have that freedom. And then they can say, okay, now I want to go, I want to grow, I want to plan. So that is possible. So the space for evolving into more mature, more qualitative institution will be provided under the new framework suggested by NEP. But it definitely doesn't mean that if you implement NEP, next year, next 5 years, you are going to have so many institutions with that much of ranking. These two are not, I think, going hand in hand.
Thank you, sir. Another question is from Bahubali Noraje. Does it policy help to aid college regarding finance to provide facilities by institute?
Yeah, I mean, you see, there is going to be a separate funding vertical. There is going to be a national funding agency. Grant Council, and every institution can directly approach the Grant Council for different kinds of grants. It is for scholarships as well as development grants. Okay, so it's a competitive one. By the way, every institution as per the NEP will have to have their own institutional development plan, an IDP. Now, funding depends on your IDP because your IDP will have to be very, very perfect. Your IDP will have to be really strong. IDP will have to be really concrete. It should show that, okay, if I give you money, this is going to happen. So the process is every institution will draw up its own institutional development plan and will approach the funding agency with that institutional development plan, and grants will be forthcoming. The simple answer is yes, you can approach the funding agency for grants.
Thank you, sir. And one more question is from Madam Pratima KK. How NEP is more competitive education policy than policies in developed countries?
It's very difficult thing to say. I don't want to really compare NEP with the education policy of any other country and say that, okay, this NEP is better than that, or this NEP is not as good as that, etc. I think the national education policy now has given a good thought about the realistic situation in India. I'm sure they would have, while writing the report or preparing for it, they would have definitely referred to many of the documents, both Indian as well as from outside, and they have tried to evolve something which is connecting education as a whole, starting from primary education or preschool education up till higher education. So I can only say this is the first time that in India we have a policy that is so comprehensive and that addresses education at all levels. There have been, earlier also there were educational policies. There were many good things in them. I am not saying that. they were not good, this is good. I'm only saying that this is very comprehensive, and not many countries really have that kind of a totally comprehensive kind of a policy. To that extent, yes, but definitely no possibility to compare with country A, country B and say that, okay, our policy is inferior to or superior to that.
Thank you, sir. Another question is from Commander H.N. Satish. Your comments on proposing curriculum standardization for UG and PG programs by Higher Education Regularity Council or respective national council. For example, what NCERT did for schools.
Yeah, you see now that's exactly what NEP was trying to say, that there are multiple bodies, and now you are going to have one general education council, and except for law and medicine, for all other streams, there is going to be standard setting done by the General Education Council. Okay. Now, what is the advantage of this? The advantage of that is now you don't have institutions working in isolation. Okay. So you will have a single agency doing everything, and therefore comparability and then putting common standards, all that is going to be there, and therefore it is proposed to establish a General Education Council, which is going to be the standard setting body. However, professional standard setting, for example, to be an architect, okay, to be an architect, there is a standard that is required. So there are professional standard setting that is required, which might continue to be done by the existing institutions or a separate professional standard setting body. That is where the NEP has said that some of these institutions can continue to work as professional standard setting bodies.
Thank you, sir. One more question from Mr. Gautam Mulkaledu. If the person has finished PhD but again wishes to study MBBS, can he join medical college? Will such education method permitted through NEP 2020?
Well, again, let me make it very clear that regulation and what can I say, at the institutional level or at the state level, regulations are different and NEP is different. NEP doesn't talk anything about that. NEP only talks about the overall focus of higher education. Now, what you are talking about is, I think somebody has done a PhD and now can this person join medical? If this person holds the minimum qualification to enroll to a medical degree, well, I think it should be possible. Of course, it is dependent on the regulations prevalent in that state or in that institution at a given point of time. Now, NEP is not setting any rule. NEP is not saying, for example, somebody asked this question whether I can simultaneously pursue 2 degree programs or 1 degree and 1 diploma programs. Okay, these are related to regulations, and NEP is not, really focusing on that. It is only saying that you have a regulation which is comprehensive, which is light, but it effectively oversees higher education. For a lot of things, freedom is given to institutions. So actually, allowing a person to pursue a particular program, provided a minimum qualification is there, is the decision of the institution.
Thank you, sir. This question is from Mr. C.K. Renukarya. With NEP, we will be giving away the higher education sector to corporate sector, because even 6% of GDP to education sector will be a drop in the ocean?
Yes, I'm not sure whether we will be corporatizing higher education. In fact, NEP very specifically talks about the issue of commercializing education, and it says education should never become a commodity, something like that. So commercialization should not take place. In the wish list of NEP, definitely it says that commercialization should not take place. But as I said, one of the important challenges is resource. Who and how do you get resource? Now, if it is not possible for state to bring in resources, then maybe there is a danger. That's a challenge which I say, that education is going to be increasingly privatized. It's already private. You know, in our system already, higher education is dominantly private in nature. It's going to be much more. And there is a possibility that the private institutions might really slip into that mode of education becoming business in bracket. But if, as NEP, aspires, if we are going to put in place a kind of a common regulation, imagine whether it's a private university or a public college, the rules are the same. If you are going to have that kind of a regulatory framework, then I don't see the danger of, that kind of corporatization. Because in the present system, take a best example in Karnataka, in case of some of the private universities. The chancellor of a private university is actually the owner of that institution. It is not someone who has necessarily that academic standard. Now, this will have to be done away with if that institution has to really grow into a higher education institution of value. NEP seeks to do that because NEP wants to avoid this conflict of interest. Now, that is NEP's part. Now, it is our job, the government's job, the state government's job to put in place a regulation to make that possible. If that kind of a regulation comes in place, then I don't see that danger. But as I said in the challenges, there are a lot of vested interests. The vested interest might be in the form of the State Department, which has the power. Vested interest might be in the form of those who own the educational institutions or the private universities. A lot of people will have their stake, and if their stake is going to be affected, whether they would all be willing for this kind of a change. It starts right from the state. So that is the challenge. Therefore, for me, the critical problem is, can we really develop a mechanism to in such a way that we realize these goals that are set by NEP? That looks to be a greater problem for me than possibility of commercialization or corporatization.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Madam Savita Pandey. How to check the hurdles laid down by bureaucrats since person makes or marks the institution?
Yeah, I don't have the answer. Let me tell you this. For example, what we are now thinking, since I'm part of the various persons involved in supposed to be implementing this, though of course I'm not a member of the task force or anything. So what I'm seeing is that now you have a state which is willing to implement it. Therefore, my feeling was, when I was giving a report, my feeling was, let us try and push as much of reform as possible. Okay. Now, whether finally they accept it or not, that's a different thing. So from our side, what we can do is the best that is possible to realize the objectives set in the NEP. What is required, let us recommend that. Whether bureaucracy accepts it, whether the legislature accepts it, is not in our hands anyway. So I can't definitely say whether bureaucracy, I put it as one challenge, I said how bureaucracy responds to this.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Mrs. Venkat Lakshmi MN from Mahajana SPR FGC. In what way or to what extent it is beneficial to provide private aided colleges?
I did not get the question.
I repeat, sir. In what way or to what extent it is beneficial to private aided colleges?
Okay, you mean to what extent NEP is beneficial to private aided colleges?
Yes,
okay.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, it is, see, if you are looking at the benefits, then benefits are there for everybody. It is not just for the private aided colleges. even government institutions can evolve into autonomous degree awarding institutions, right? And similarly, private institutions also can emerge into autonomous degree awarding institution. Let me take your own institution. I think you have already reached the stage where you have become autonomous. I think obviously the next stage for you is to become a institution on your own, university on your own. There were hurdles for this. There were, it was not easy earlier. In the present system, it is definitely going to be easy. Easy in the sense the route is clear. You will know how your institution can be taken to a certain level. You will know what needs to be done for that. All those things will be there.
I think there has been power interruption for Dr. Dongre. And the video is frozen.
Yes, sir. There's a power interruption from his
Rajmi, can you call him and then ask him whether we can close it?
Yes, sir. We are trying. We are trying to call him.
Yeah.
Audio not.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Srimati Rashmi Aras, convener of the event, to render the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Hope all the sessions of today's webinar could create a better understanding of National Education Policy 2020 and make all of us be prepared for its implementation. At the outset, I'm glad to propose the vote of thanks for today's program. I deem it my privilege to thank today's first speaker, Dr. Shakila Shamshu, formerly OSD, National Education Policy, MHRD, New Delhi, for having accepted our invitation and for enlightening all of us with her great experience in the process of framing national education policy in India. I also deem it my privilege to thank today's second speaker, Professor Yashwant Dongre, Chairperson of Subcommittee, Task Force for Implementation of NEP in Karnataka, for accepting our invitation and for giving insight on the change and transformation in system and governance of education in line of implementation of NEP, specifically in Karnataka. I thank our Honorable Secretary, Dr. Vijayalakshmi T. Muralidhar, for motivating and supporting all of us throughout the event. I thank our beloved Principal, Dr. V.R. Jaikumari, for providing continuous support in organizing such academic events. I thank our Governing Council member, Sri Rajesh, for gracing the occasion. I thank Dr. C.K. Renukaria, Director, Mahajana PG Center, for his gracious presence. I thank Dr. Isar Ramesh, CEO and Academic Advisor, for his gracious presence. I wholeheartedly thank all the participants from different parts of India for having registered for the event and actively participated in the event, making it a grand success. I thank all my dear colleagues for their untiring support in organizing the event and making it a success. I thank all the support staff and special thanks to Mr. Karthik, Mr. Manjunath and Mr. Ashok Kumar for their technical assistance and for being with us throughout the event in making this event easy and simple for every one of us. Thank you, everyone. A small piece of information for all the participants. The link for feedback will be uploaded in the WhatsApp group. Kindly fill in the feedback form to get qualified for getting the certification. Thank you one and all for joining us for the webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got disconnected. I'm now back. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being a part of the webinar and sharing your